This is the multi-voice text-to-speech podfic reading of Be Silent Like Deep Water by Her Smile Forges Galaxies, composed by Burning Aurora, Caliona, and Flower Hawk. Waking up with an unspoken sigh is something Remus has become accustomed to over the years, yet it is something that perhaps he will never fully get used to, despite this. The silence is something he has always despised, always longed to desperately avoid in an effort to prevent the never-ending spiral further into loneliness. It is something that he found himself unable to avoid after that fateful day 10 years ago, when his whole life turned upside down, when his life may as well have ended. Perhaps it is selfish to wish it did, but sometimes he looks up into the night sky feverishly searching for a shooting star, something to wish upon, something to take him away from what has slowly become his reality. This shouldn't be his reality, not when he had plans. He was going to go to university, become a teacher, something he had always dreamt of. He shouldn't be here, rolling out of bed late because the watch that provides the gentle vibrations to pull him out of his slumber was across the room, on charge. Once more in his one-bedroom flat, slowly getting ready for his shift at the coffee shop down the road, where he is forced into social interaction despite not being able to communicate. He can't complain, not really. It was his choice to take the job, to wear a badge under his name that explained he was mute. This wasn't the case at all, but it was easier than struggling through life trying to explain. He has found that people try to over-sympathize when they discover what happened, and this is the last thing Remus wants. He doesn't want people to look at him with a sad smile and half-lidded eyes. He doesn't want them to look at him as they over-enunciate their words, assuming this will magically make Remus understand what they are saying. He doesn't want to be the person they whisper about behind his back. Not that they would have to whisper, he wouldn't hear them anyway. Walking to the coffee shop is something he always enjoys. He watches as the traffic bustles past him, the children scream, the teenagers blare their music as they try and keep up with several conversations amongst their friends. These are the sounds he always struggled with before, but now he can simply walk along and pretend no one else exists. He runs his hand along the side of a bus, feeling the thrumming of the engine in his fingertips. He presses his hand flat against the edge of the guitar that the busker down the road plays, like he does every morning. He can feel the beat pulsing through his veins, and the man smiles. He will come in to get a coffee later, and Remus will smile at him. He doesn't smile at many people, but he always does for the man with the guitar that lets Remus feel the music he longs to hear. The coffee shop is quiet, much to his relief. Dorcas smiles at him, and he offers a muffled apology that he knows is only half tangible through the vibrations in his throat. Keeping up with his speech was something he tried to do, but it wasn't easy when he couldn't hear his own voice, when he couldn't hear the words he was putting out into the world. He pulls on his ear defenders, something that Dorcas suggested to ensure people didn't demand their orders vocally, followed by his apron, making sure his pins are both visible. One that holds his name, the other claiming a half-truth that is easier than the questioning frowns, the enunciated words, the never-ending pitiful looks that make him want to crawl under a rock, hiding from the world. It is easier this way, so this way it will stay. Pressing his hand to the speaker between serving each customer is his favorite thing about working in a relaxed atmosphere of the coffee shop. Dorcas allows him to choose the music sometimes, despite him not being able to hear the words. Perhaps leaving this world wouldn't be his wish, the wish he would put out into the night sky if he were able to catch sight of a shooting star. Perhaps it would be something as simple as to listen to music again, to hear the drum beat in the background, the soft keys during the melody, the bass coming in for the chorus before fading away. Music is something he will always miss the most, and that much he is sure of. The flow of the customers increases when the lunchtime rush hits, but Remus manages to keep up. Dorcas's girlfriend Marlene comes out to help him when the line reaches the door, both of them effortlessly moving around each other as they prepare drinks and warm toasted sandwiches. He spends his lunch break sitting outside on the back step, the little cat from the old lady down the road for company, his pasta salad from home, and a coffee from the shop. He drops his head back against the wall and looks up at the clouds, the birds flittering around in the spring air. Sometimes he wonders what it would be like to be a bird. He wonders what it would be like to float through life without a care in the world, thousands of people going about mundane things far below as you watch on. No need to listen, only required to watch. It would be easier, he thinks, to be that far away from reality. Nobody would expect an answer from him then, not if he was high in the sky. He would loop around the air carelessly, watching each and every person he possibly could. He thinks he would like it, to be a bird. He thinks it would be far simpler than the life he is forced to live, the hand he has been dealt, the never-ending spiral further into loneliness. Perhaps it would be easier, to be a bird. He goes back to making drinks when he re-enters the coffee shop, putting on his ear defenders once more and holding out the menu. He has been working here for 3 years now, and rarely gets in any trouble, thanks to the regulars knowing to simply show Remus what they would like to order, or jot it down with the little pen and pad he keeps tucked away in the front pocket of his apron. When he thinks about it, some people may assume he is deaf. After all, ear defenders surely don't block out all noise, not that he can be sure, but they never expect an answer if they voice their requests before realizing their error. When the man with the guitar comes in, requesting his usual spiced chai latte with extra foam and a cardamom vanilla bean sugar cookie, Remus smiles. He doesn't know this man's name, but he is always happy, always smiling, always singing. He is older than Remus by a considerable number of years, already looking close to his 50s, but he is always happy. He reminds Remus of his father, back when he was still alive. The way his hair is graying at the edges, the way his wrinkles cover his forehead, the way his back arches just slightly. It makes Remus ache for the loss, and the memories that he doesn't often allow into his mind, not anymore. The shop is quiet, so when the man adjusts his guitar, taking Remus's hand in his own and pressing it flat to the edge, he closes his eyes. He feels the soft vibrations through his veins as the man strums softly, enabling him to fully relax and take his first deep breath of the day. He wishes he could stay in this moment forever, the gentle scent of coffee surrounding him as he absorbs every ounce of the music that he can. Ending his shift is something he longs for, yet dreads simultaneously. He is exhausted from hours on his feet, hours of trying to lip read and keep up with orders. He longs to go home and put his feet up, curling under a blanket and picking up his favorite book. Going home alone is something he dreads. He always thought he would meet someone before now, before he reached 24 years old. He knows he is still young, but he has always been a hopeless romantic. He has always been waiting for his own Hallmark movie moment where he would meet the love of his life, where they would want to spend every second of the day together, where they would love so deep that it aches. He gave up on that dream, though, knowing that it would never work, not like this. How could he ever expect somebody to exist alongside him when he is unable to hear their softly spoken words, their nighttime ramblings, their yells in exasperation, their promises that will remain unbroken, their broken moans and gasps of pleasure? He would be unable to hear any of it, and this wouldn't be fair. It wouldn't be fair to put somebody through that, not when they could be happy with someone who isn't like Remus, someone who can hear. Banishing those thoughts from his mind, he makes his way home. He flicks on the kettle before pulling off his shoes, pushing them into the little stand by the door. He hangs up his coat and changes out of his work clothes, pulling on some soft trousers and a knitted jumper. He smiles when he notices the cat from next door on his windowsill, pulling the window open to let her inside. He knows he shouldn't interact with a cat that belongs to somebody else, but he can never resist the little teeth on show as she presumably lets out soft purrs, the wet nose nudging gently into his hand, the way she pushes her face into the crook of his neck. He talks to the cat. She is the only one who hears his voice on the majority of his days. He tells her about his day, practicing words he once knew like the back of his hand. Something he didn't expect was losing the confidence to speak aloud, not when he had at least 12 years of practice. It was a whole different experience to speak when you are unable to hear, and it isn't one he enjoys. Speaking to the cat is different, though. Different to any time he has attempted talking to anyone other than Dorcas. He doesn't know what it is about her that takes away some of the worry, but he still wouldn't attempt much more than a handful of half-mumbled words. The cat follows him inside as he talks, but he doesn't know if she responds to his words. He doesn't know if she lets out soft mews in response. When he sits down in his tattered armchair, cup of tea in hand, she follows and curls herself up in his lap. He smiles and runs his fingers through her soft black fur. She has a little purple collar around her neck, holding a silver tag with her name and a bell on. He wishes he could hear the bell to ensure he would never miss her visits. Soleil, she is called, and he likes that name. He thinks it suits her. When he is alone once more and his mug is empty, he takes himself to bed. Making himself food is a chore most days, so he simply doesn't bother. Sure, he knows he should, but there is nobody here to force him. Sometimes he wishes there were. He wishes he could stand alongside somebody in the kitchen, shoulders knocking and soft smiles on their faces as they prepare a meal they will both enjoy. Sometimes he wishes he had a small cluster of friends that could join him for a few glasses of wine, sharing soft conversations as they snack on crisps and nuts, and bread and cheese. He thinks he would like that. Lying in his bed and looking up at the moonlit ceiling is peaceful. He is silent like deep water, everything becoming more muffled as he imagines the water filling his ears. He closes his eyes and envisions he is floating away like a stray piece of driftwood in the ocean, the smell of salt filling the air as his body sways fluently through the freezing depths. A small sigh escapes his lips, but whether that be a sigh of relief or a sigh of dejection, he isn't entirely sure. When morning comes around once more, he wakes to the gentle vibrations on his wrist. The sky is dark outside, from what he can see through the gap in his curtains, and he reluctantly pulls himself out of bed, looking out at the gentle raindrops hitting the pavement outside. He loves the rain, but not when he has to go to work. Pulling his clothes out of his wardrobe and tossing them onto his bed, he rubs his eyes before walking towards the kitchen. He pulls some ready-made pancakes out of the cupboard and places a couple into the toaster. Once his breakfast is gone, with a cup of tea on the side, he climbs into the shower. The water sheds away the remaining slither of exhaustion that still lingered on his skin, preparing him for the day ahead. He checks his phone whilst he pulls on his clothes, finding nothing new waiting for him. As he pulls his door closed behind him, turning the key in the lock, the post van pulls up. He waits, offering a soft smile as he accepts his letters. He sighs to himself when he notices the one from the hospital, likely requesting him to come into their clinic once more. They try frequently, but he never attends. It isn't that he doesn't appreciate their efforts, their suggestions, their promises that they will do anything they can, but he is scared. They tried hearing aids, and they did nothing. The next step was an operation, they said, to put in cochlear implants in an effort to help him hear. There is a small chance it will be successful, a small chance it would fail. He hasn't decided yet if he is willing to take the risk, to raise his hopes only for them to be shattered once more. Shoving the letters into his backpack, he pulls out his ear defenders, slipping them on as he pushes his way into the coffee shop. Marlene greets him with a smile, and he runs his hand through his hair, placing his bag in the back room and pulling on his apron. He takes his place behind the counter, making the drinks as Marlene passes back the slips of paper holding the orders. He can see the rain hitting the window and longs to hear it, hear the soft pattering of water against the pane of glass that the majority of people find reason enough to complain about. Remus is left alone whilst Marlene goes to help Dorcas in the back, preparing the last of the food before the lunchtime rush. He moves around like he does every other day, the routine coming to him like it is his second nature. He has a small light on the back wall, one that lights up each time the door opens, enabling him to know when there is a customer if he has his back turned. He insisted it wasn't necessary, but now he would willingly admit to Dorcas that it helps more than he ever thought it could. Each time the light glows, he turns around, serving the customer, before turning back to reorganize, clean, or take a moment to breathe. When the light glows again, he turns around, pulling out the menu from his pocket. He stops short when he sees a man he has never seen before, a man more beautiful than he ever knew was possible. He has dark hair, pulled into a messy bun atop his head. He has a black leather jacket on and a bike helmet tucked under his arm. He has an award-winning smile as he runs his gaze up Remus's body without shame. He feels himself getting red at the attention. He forces himself to step forward, holding back a roll of his eyes when the man starts talking. He knows it isn't his fault, not when he hasn't been here before. Remus taps his pencil against the counter when his words become too fast to keep up, bringing his hands to his ear defenders in a way he feels is almost protectively. The man's gaze follows his movements, and his mouth closes instantly, his eyes flicking between where Remus's hands are resting and his eyes, like he is desperate for answers. Realization sets in when his gaze drops to Remus's apron, clearly catching sight of his nonverbal badge. He feels a smile tugging at his lips when the man starts talking again, and he just about makes out an apology on his lips before the man slaps one hand over his mouth and buries the other in his hair, turning around. If Remus could hear, he would be sure he is letting out a groan right about now. When he turns back, Remus lowers his hands, and the man takes a deep breath before smiling softly. He shakes his head when Remus holds out the menu, gesturing to the small notebook in his apron instead. Remus pulls it out and hands it over reluctantly. People don't do this often, choosing to simply point out what they want rather than take the time to write it down. He feels nothing but anxiety washing over him as he waits for his scribbling to stop, which is new, something he has never felt before. The man frowns and crosses something out before continuing his movements, and then he straightens up, holding it out with a shy smile. Remus's hands shake as he accepts it.
I'm sorry. I really should pay more attention before I start talking. I didn't mean to offend you.
The first part says, and Remus shakes his head, hoping to show that he didn't offend him. The man smiles, and Remus continues reading.
I would just like a black coffee and whatever the baguette of the day is, please.
Remus smiles to himself when he reaches the next part.
The name for the order is Sirius. Shit. I forgot you are nonverbal again. Ignore that and just punch me in the arm when it is ready. I deserve it after this. Smiley face.
Letting out a soft laugh, Remus holds his hand out for the pen, and Sirius hands it over without hesitation.
You didn't offend me, don't worry. I think I would lose my job if I punched you in the arm to let you know your food is ready, but the idea is inviting, winky face.
He bites down on his bottom lip as he pushes the notebook back across the counter, turning his back before he can see Sirius's reaction. He never replies to people when they write something down, not unless he absolutely has to, but he is sure that his response is borderline flirting, which is definitely something he never does. He busies himself with preparing Sirius's drink before pulling out the baguette of the day, followed by a chocolate brownie that he didn't ask for, but Remus feels like he deserves it. After all, he is likely going to be feeling guilty about his mistake for the remainder of the day. Remus steals more glances than would be considered acceptable as he deliberately takes his time placing his food in paper wrapping. He doesn't do this often, with him rarely finding people attractive, but there is something about Sirius that is demanding his full attention. Each time he looks, Sirius's gaze is already on him. There is a permanent soft smile on his lips, but no more attempted words as he watches Remus work. He doesn't like being watched, but this feels different somehow. This feels almost natural in a way company has never felt before. Shaking his head, he lets out an inaudible sigh, or perhaps it was audible to other people. He never can be sure. He waits for Sirius to pull out his card before holding out the machine, finding himself wishing he weren't leaving already. They lock eyes after he has paid, and Remus's breath catches. He has never seen eyes like Sirius's before. The steel gray with lighter flecks throughout reminds him of the rocks by his childhood home, the ones he would visit when he needed the escape. He can remember going there before the accident, listening to the waves crashing against the rocks, darkening the color until it dried and faded once more. He can remember going there after everything changed, how the first time he cried was watching the waves without the sound to go alongside it. He feels like he could get lost in his eyes, lost for an eternity in the never-ending pools of silver. Sirius smiles, and everything washes away, which he doesn't understand. He doesn't understand how a stranger can make him feel safe, accepted, understood in a way he never thought he would experience. The way Sirius smiles at him is gentle, but curious. It is almost like he has 1,000 questions that he wouldn't consider asking, simply because he cares too much about doing the wrong thing. It isn't something he is used to, but he knows he can't get used to it. Sirius will leave the cafe and tell his friends that he expected somebody who doesn't speak to respond to his order. He will tell them that it is strange for somebody like that to work in a coffee shop, to expect people to point out or write their requests. He will tell them that he won't be coming back. He will simply go to an ordinary cafe in the future. Remus is sure this is all that he will say, but he finds that he wouldn't even blame him. He smiles and pushes his order across the counter, dropping his gaze as he refuses to raise his hopes. He doesn't raise his hopes, not when it comes to his hearing, not when it comes to attractive strangers who simply want a coffee. He turns away and remains still until the light on the back wall glows, and then he turns, hoping that Sirius has walked away from the coffee shop, away from Remus. When he turns, the space in front of him is empty once more, but the little notebook he keeps in the front pocket of his apron is lying on the counter, pen placed carefully on top. He steps forward, holding it carefully in his hands as he looks down at the words.
Thank you for the coffee, Remus.
He smiles and brings his hand to his badge, secretly thankful that Sirius cared enough to pay attention to his name. Remus almost drops a tray of mugs when Sirius walks into the coffee shop the next day, with this being the last thing he expected to happen. He is sure his expression is complete and utter awe as he takes in his appearance, a stark difference from the previous day. The sun is shining today, and Sirius is wearing a crop top, a purple crop top paired with a pair of black skinny jeans. He has tattoos visible on his waist, a floral design snaking up one arm, words on his collarbone. His hair is once again in a messy bun atop his head, but today a clip is carefully placed on the side, a clip holding a crescent moon. His eyes are rimmed with black eyeliner, and he has a silver ring in his nose that was definitely absent yesterday. He knows this because he would have noticed. If Sirius notices the prolonged gaze Remus offers him as he runs his eyes up and down his body, he doesn't mention it. He simply smiles and steps closer when the previous person has made their way to their table, drink in hand. Remus takes a steadying breath and holds out the menu with a small smile, fully believing that Sirius may be the second person he feels himself pleased to see, much like the busker who plays the guitar down the road and allows Remus to feel the thrum of the music he is desperate to hear. Sirius shakes his head and gestures to the notebook once again, eyes never leaving Remus's. He nods hesitantly and holds it out, adjusting his ear defenders as Sirius begins scribbling away. It has been so long since he has heard a voice, since he longed to hear a specific voice, but he thinks, selfishly, that he would like to hear Sirius's. He wonders if it is deep like the echo in a never-ending cave, high like pennies hitting the bottom of a wishing well, perhaps sweet, like honey drizzled over fruit in the morning sun. He wishes he could narrow this down, reach out and feel the vibrations of the words beneath his skin. With the notebook back in his hands, he reluctantly tears his gaze away from Sirius, looking down at his beautifully written words.
Sorry again about yesterday. I was so mortified I considered not coming back, but I never can resist a well-made coffee and someone who is shamelessly flirty with hazel eyes. Not that I have met one before you.
He has written, and Remus feels himself blush at his words.
I wasn't flirting, I was stating a fact.
He writes, knowing full well that this is a half-truth.
What can I get for you today, Sirius?
Handing it back over, he watches as Sirius bites down on his bottom lip, eyes scanning the words. He meets Remus's eye once more before bringing the pen back to paper, and he feels like he is holding his breath.
You remembered my name? I am flattered. Winky face. A black coffee and blueberry muffin, please.
He writes, and Remus smiles before turning his back, leaving the notebook on the counter as he prepares his drink. How Sirius ever thought Remus could forget a name as beautiful as his is beyond him. He found comfort in the night sky when everything else felt out of reach, and he learnt all about the constellations. He knows that Sirius is the brightest star in the sky, and he believes this couldn't be more accurate for the man standing behind him. He doesn't know what it is. There is just something about him, something he can't quite put his finger on yet. Instead, he forces the thoughts from his mind, pushing the takeaway cup across the counter before pulling a blueberry muffin out. Sirius smiles his thanks as he pays, a soft blush visible on his sharp cheekbones. He opens his mouth before pausing, shaking his head as he offers an apologetic smile and turns his attention to the notebook instead. Remus smiles as he wipes the coffee spill from the side, drying his hands on the tea towel hung on the little hook to his left. When he looks up, Sirius is already watching him. He smiles again and turns to leave, throwing a glance over his shoulder before passing the threshold of the little coffee shop. Remus looks down at his words.
Thank you for the brownie yesterday. I am determined to repay that one day. See you tomorrow, Remus.
He smiles, tucking the notebook back into the pocket of his apron. A week passes, and then 2. Sirius comes back to the coffee shop every day, never again trying to voice his order, but always requesting the notebook. Remus has found himself talking more when he is alone in his flat. He will tell the cat from next door all about Sirius, more about his words that he glances over whenever he feels the need. He talks about his hair, how he longs to run his fingers through it. He talks about his eyes, how he longs to get lost in them. He talks about his voice, how he longs to hear it. He talks about Sirius more than he has spoken of anything. It makes Remus feel guilty when he takes a step back, lying in his bed at night, wondering what Sirius would say if he knew Remus was practicing how to say his name, with no guidance as to whether his pronunciation is correct. He has no need to learn his name. He is simply somebody who comes into the little coffee shop every day, requesting something to get him through the never-ending afternoons. He doesn't see Remus as anything other than his barista, which is what he is. The sun is slowly rising in the sky as he makes his way to the coffee shop, birds circling the air as they presumably offer their morning song to the world. When Remus reaches the bus stop, he smiles, running his hand along the stationary bus as the passers-by make their way on and to their seats. He can feel the rattling that begins the majority of his days. When he reaches the busker down the road who plays his guitar, he smiles, reaching out and placing his hand flat against the edge. He tilts his head back and closes his eyes, smiling as his fingertips come to life with music he longs to hear. Dorcas raises an eyebrow as he walks through the door, gesturing to the far corner where Sirius sits, back against the window, book in his hands, table empty in front of him. This is hours earlier to the usual time Sirius comes in, but he finds himself smiling as he pulls on his ear defenders, places his bag in the back room, and secures his apron around his waist. Dorcas hands over a napkin with a handful of words scribbled on before she makes her way into the back room. He looks down, a wider smile tugging at his lips.
He was waiting for you. Didn't want me to serve him. Winky face.
She writes, and Remus blushes. It doesn't take long for Sirius to walk up to the counter, book in hand and a smile on his face. Even after 2 weeks, he doesn't tire of the soft expression on his face. It feels strange to have such a connection to somebody he hasn't spoken to, hasn't touched, hasn't taken the time to get to know. Not like he wants to, anyway. He finds himself wishing he knew everything about Sirius, not just the little details he shares with the paper and pen. He wants to know his favorite color, his favorite food, his friends and family, what he likes to do in his spare time. Everything. That is what he longs to learn. Everything he possibly can.
Morning.
Sirius writes on the paper, and Remus smiles.
Good morning, Sirius.
He replies, not waiting for him to write down his coffee order. After all, he orders the same drink each and every day. It is only the food that changes. Sometimes a blueberry muffin, sometimes a baguette, sometimes both. Sometimes he will ask for a brownie, other times a tea cake. He never orders anything lemon, jotting down that he has never been overly fond. When he turns back, Sirius is chewing at his thumbnail, eyes focused on Remus until he meets his gaze, and then he quickly looks away. Remus frowns slightly and steps forward, placing the coffee down before turning to the notebook to see what he has ordered to eat. What he doesn't expect is to see an entirely different request.
What are you doing for your lunch break? I wondered if you would join me for a drink.
Remus blushes as he brings his pen to paper.
I usually eat out the back. There is a step in the alley.
He writes down, not knowing why Sirius would want him to join him. It isn't like they can have a conversation after all. Glancing back up, Sirius still won't meet his eye, so he adds another line underneath.
But I would love to join you for a drink.
He writes, pushing the notebook back across the counter. Sirius's eyes scan the words quickly before he looks up, shy smile on his face as he nods in confirmation. He gestures to the croissants today, which is something he has never had before, and Remus pulls one out for him, adding it to a plate and placing it on the tray. Sirius smiles and takes it back to his table, his eyes meeting Remus's as soon as he turns back around. The beginning of his shift passes slowly, achingly slowly. He steals glances at Sirius as often as he can and finds himself smiling as he makes them both a drink. He leaves his apron on when he joins Sirius at the table, despite often choosing to remove it for his lunch break. Sirius is lost in his book and startles slightly when Remus places the mugs down on the table before looking up with a soft smile. As he sits down on the chair next to him, he meets Marlene's eye. She smiles wide and offers him a nod of encouragement. She is the only other person here, besides Dorcas, that knows he is deaf. Sirius reaches out hesitantly and steals the notebook from the front pocket of his apron, flicking it to a clean page. He pulls his own pen out of his bag and leans forward, scribbling down some words.
I'm glad you could join me.
It reads, followed by another few words.
I thought we could get to know each other.
Remus nods and pulls out his pen, sipping his scalding hot tea in an effort to keep his smile at bay. Sirius writes down some questions before they both provide their answers, starting off with the little things Remus wanted to know.
What is your favorite color?
He asks. Remus writes.
Green.
Sirius writes.
Red. Any siblings?
Comes next. Remus writes.
No.
Sirius writes.
Yes, a brother, only a year younger. What is your dream job?
Sirius jots down, smiling wide. Remus hesitates before writing.
Teacher.
Sirius writes down.
Tattoo artist.
Remus slides the notebook across the table.
Did you reach your dream?
He writes, sliding it back and raising an eyebrow in question.
Yes, I did.
Sirius scribbles underneath, and there is a silent understanding for him not to ask Remus, which he is thankful for.
What do you do in your spare time?
Remus decides to ask, and Sirius smiles.
I read a bit and go for walks along the lake, listen to music. How about you?
He writes, and Remus sighs.
I like to read and spend time with my neighbor's cat.
Sirius smiles and asks if he likes animals. The conversation drifts on, flowing easily with nothing but the scratching of pen to paper that Remus himself cannot hear. They talk about their friends, yet Remus can only mention Dorcas and Marlene. Neither asks about family. Perhaps this is another silent understanding, a threshold neither of them are willing to cross. Sirius writes down little details Remus asks for, telling him about his motorbike and his tattoos. They talk about music, and if Sirius thinks it is strange that Remus only mentions old songs, the ones he vaguely remembers from before, then he doesn't mention it. He feels an ache inside of him when he has to go back to work, taking over from Marlene as she disappears to help Dorcas again. The ache isn't that he missed the springtime breeze or the birds circling the air above him. No, the ache comes from walking away from Sirius. He feels like they have learnt so much about each other in such a short space of time, yet he still longs to learn more. He longs to learn everything. When the busker from down the road that plays a guitar comes in, Remus smiles. He glances at Sirius before he places his hand flat against the edge, ensuring he is focused on his book, despite knowing the soft strumming will likely pull his attention away. He closes his eyes and takes a deep breath before preparing his coffee. When Sirius stands to leave the coffee shop, he approaches the counter, writing a line at the bottom of their page of questions.
I had a lovely time today, thank you, Remus.
When another week has passed, Remus finds himself sitting with Sirius every day, taking his lunch break later than usual when Sirius comes into the coffee shop. Despite learning everything they can, they never run out of things to write. Whether this is about the weather, their favorite books, something James did that Sirius thought was hilarious. There is always something for them to write about. Remus looks up with a smile when Sirius enters, before quickly turning his attention to the next person in the queue, which is somebody new, somebody he hasn't seen before. He tries to put on a smile when the man talks and gestures to his badge before holding out the menu, like he does each time somebody new comes in. The man frowns at him, eyes flicking between the menu and his badge, like he is a puzzle there is no way of solving. With no warning, the man begins talking rapidly, seemingly angry as he gestures around the room. Remus can't hear what he is saying, and his mouth is moving too quickly to keep up. Sirius steps forward, eyes narrowed as he says something to the man, who glares in response. Remus takes a step backwards and shakes his head, not knowing what is happening. He hasn't had to deal with many people getting aggressive over his time in the coffee shop, and he doesn't know what to do. The man pushes Sirius away, and he raises his hands in surrender, throwing a cautionary glance at Remus as he says something to the man, something that appears to have come out as quiet. The man argues back, gesturing wide with his arms before focusing on Remus and continuing his words. He focuses on the movements of his lips, desperately trying to decipher what he is saying, but he can't. Dorcas comes through the door and grips Remus's shoulders, gesturing for him to go out the back whilst she deals with it. He goes willingly, feeling everything boil up inside of him once more. This isn't something he hates the most about being deaf, knowing that hearing the words would likely hurt more, but sometimes he wishes he didn't have to fight to keep up with an ordinary conversation, one that could likely be easily resolved, or even be avoided if Remus was able to simply take his order. He sits down on the step and drops his head into his hands. The sun is beating down on his back, but he doesn't smile, not today. He feels like the little bubble of optimism that he has been living in for the past few weeks has popped, bringing him back to reality with a sickening thump so violent that it feels like he is back there, back to 10 years ago. The world spins around him as he squeezes his eyes closed hard, until all he can see is stars. The hand on his arm startles him, jolting his gaze upwards to see Sirius crouching down to the floor in front of him. He retracts his hand instantly, and Remus finds himself wishing he would put it back. The warm skin against his is something he has longed to feel for as long as he has known Sirius. He drops his head back to the wall instead, offering what he hopes is a reassuring smile. Sirius opens his mouth before closing it again, looking down at his hands before his gaze shifts to the little pocket on the front of Remus's apron. It is then that they both realize he left the notebook and pen in the cafe, lying on the side of the counter, out of sight but easily accessible when he came up to order. He opens his mouth again before letting out what appears to be a sigh. Remus wonders if he could do it, if he could concentrate enough to read the words he speaks. Hesitantly, he brings his hands up to remove his ear defenders, wondering if this will encourage Sirius to talk, to let Remus once again imagine if his voice is deep like the echo in a never-ending cave, high like pennies hitting the bottom of a wishing well, or sweet like honey drizzled over fruit in the morning sun. Sirius smiles and raises an eyebrow. Remus nods in response, focusing only on his lips as he waits for the first words to come. Sirius hasn't tried to talk to him in weeks, not since the first couple of days. It feels strange, waiting for something he never noticed the absence of after it had become second nature between them. They don't need words, not to communicate.
Are you all right?
Sirius mouths, speaking without volume for Remus. It is almost like he has accidentally caught the button on the television remote that seizes all sounds. Only he can't get them back, not like a television can. Remus nods, fiddling with his ear defenders in his lap. He longs to reach out, to place his hand against the side of Sirius's neck and feel the vibrations of his words. He can't do that, though. He knows he can't.
What he said.
Sirius begins, but then he drops his head slightly, obscuring the next few words. Remus frowns slightly until Sirius looks back up, eyes full of concern.
But he's been banned. You don't have to worry.
He finishes, but Remus doesn't know why. He doesn't know what he said. Remus nods again and risks looking away, letting out a breath of air when Sirius moves to sit next to him. The hand in his takes him by surprise at the same time as it doesn't. The contact is welcome, almost like a long time coming, and it feels right. It stills the nervous flittering of Remus's fingers, bringing a wave of calm crashing over him. He turns to Sirius just in time to see his mouth move again.
Dorcas said you can leave early.
He tells him, before hesitating slightly, his eyes scanning Remus's face as if he wants to know something, but he doesn't know how to ask.
Can I walk you home?
Remus raises his hands before he can respond, desperately trying to stop Sirius from adding anything else as he replaces his ear defenders. He feels guilty, but it hurts. It hurts to know that he is talking to him in a way that seems soft and caring, and Remus can't appreciate the sound of his voice. He nods carefully, and Sirius smiles, pulling himself up and holding his hand out to Remus. He doesn't let go when they are standing, and he doesn't let go as they make their way back through the door. They pick up Remus's bag, and he hangs up his apron before Dorcas hugs him goodbye. Sirius takes his hand again as soon as they are outside, raising an eyebrow when Remus looks his way. He smiles, never wanting to let go. The walk passes quickly with someone by his side, quicker than he ever would have liked. Everything seems brighter with Sirius by his side. The sky, the trees, the flowers, and the butterflies. He stops himself from reaching out, from running his hand along the side of the bus with the thrumming engine. He resists the urge to detour to the park to simply sit on the bench under the cherry blossom tree, watching as the world passes by right in front of his eye. He doesn't consider stopping off at the little shop in the corner to get himself some chocolates for the evening. When his steps slow and he looks up at his quiet, empty flat, Sirius frowns slightly, looking around with wide eyes before smiling. He removes his ear defenders, sensing that Sirius is going to say something, and after a moment of hesitation, he does.
You live here?
He asks silently, and Remus nods, looking up at his window with a little bookcase to the left, a potted plant to the right, and his sage green curtains hanging down each side, catching the light just right.
James lives there,
He says next, gesturing to the flat next door. Remus frowns slightly because he has never met his neighbors, aside from the cat. He nods and covers his ears once more, gesturing to the door and raising an eyebrow in question. He doesn't know if he should ask Sirius in, but he doesn't want their time together to end, not yet. It will be harder to hide his inability to hear in the comfort of his flat, where his ear defenders stay firmly in his bag, and he can freely mutter incoherent words to himself. But he doesn't want him to go, not yet. Sirius nods with a small smile, and Remus turns, unlocking the door and trying to ground himself. He wonders if he should tell Sirius now, be completely transparent, given that they appear to be on the road to friendship. He wonders what Sirius would say, how he would react to Remus having kept this from him despite the frequency of their interactions over the past month. He knows he doesn't owe anybody information about his life, but Sirius feels different. They make their way up the stairs, Remus keeping his gaze directly ahead as he pushes the door open. The cat from next door is once again sat on his windowsill, and as he pulls it open, the cat goes straight to Sirius and nudges her nose into his leg. He turns in time to see Sirius laugh and scoop the cat up into his arms, speaking so softly that Remus can't decipher the words. He places his bag on the table and pulls off his coat and shoes before walking into the kitchen. He doesn't have much in, with it only being him, but he holds up the kettle in question and Sirius nods gratefully. He picks up the post from the table, the post he tossed there this morning on his way out the door, and rolls his eyes when he notices yet another letter from the hospital. He knows he needs to respond, but he doesn't know how, not when he doesn't know what to do. Sirius walks up behind him, and he quickly opens a drawer, dropping the letter inside. He turns and offers him a smile as he pulls out 2 mugs from the cupboard. Sirius gestures to the notebook on the coffee table and raises an eyebrow in question. Remus nods, taking out a pen and offering it to him. He doesn't know why he was worried about being in the comfort of his home, not when it is clear Sirius isn't going to push to talk to Remus.
This is James and Reggie's cat.
He writes, smiling down at Soleil before scooping her up into his arms again.
They knew she was visiting someone because she always comes home happy, like she has been given nothing but comfort.
Remus smiles.
She's often on my windowsill when I get home. I can't turn her away.
He scribbles down as an explanation before he turns back to make the tea. He hesitates before putting the tea bag in Sirius's cup, only having made him black coffee before. But when Sirius nods his thanks, he makes them both a mug of tea, complete with 1 sugar each. The ceramic is chipped along the edge, but Sirius doesn't seem to mind as he accepts it with a smile, sitting down at the table.
They wouldn't expect you to.
Sirius writes down next, and Remus smiles, pleased he isn't overstepping by allowing his neighbors, James and Regulus's cat, into his tiny home. They share more written words whilst they finish their drink, but Remus doesn't remove his ear defenders, doesn't give in to the temptation to offer the cat his usual words about his day, about what Sirius wrote or how endearing he looked. After all, he can't do these things, not with Sirius here. He stays until the sun is setting in the sky, and then he stays even longer. He brings pen to paper and asks Remus if he wants to have tea with him, perhaps a takeaway from the little shop down the road. Remus shakes his head, walking to his fridge and pulling off his ear defenders. They hurt after a while. The contents of his fridge is sparse, but he has some eggs, some mushrooms and peppers, some cheese. They stand side by side and make omelets together, shoulders knocking. Sirius gestures to the radio and Remus nods, allowing him to turn it on. He watches with a smile as Sirius dances around the kitchen badly, but he doesn't hesitate in joining him when he reaches for his hand. Unable to hear the beat, he imagines his dancing is dreadful, but if Sirius notices, he doesn't mention it. He spins him around in his arms and places his hand on his shoulder. They both laugh. Remus longs to hear that sound. When they make their way back over to the oven, Sirius smiles wide and opens the cupboard, pulling out 2 plates. It feels almost domestic, the two of them cooking in the kitchen with music playing in the background. Whilst Sirius is distracted with finding the cutlery, he brings his hand to the radio, pressing it gently to the speaker. He breathes out a sigh of relief when he feels the music, an unconscious smile tugging at his lips. Sirius continues writing little questions and messages whilst they eat, smiling through Remus's responses as he tries to cut his omelette one-handed. Remus's home has never felt more like home than it does right now, and it brings up a strange kind of aching inside of him. He knows he can't get used to this, with it being a one-off after what happened in the coffee shop, but he wants to get used to it. When Sirius leaves, after helping to wash the dishes and promising he will be back in the coffee shop the following day, Remus feels more alone than he has ever before. The guilt kicks in when he climbs into bed, looking up at the moonlit ceiling above him. Sirius stayed silent for hours, as far as Remus knows. He would be none the wiser if he had spoken to the cat, spoken to Remus, even spoken to himself, but he doesn't think he did. He is sure Sirius spent hours in silence just for Remus, and that isn't fair. That is selfish of him, he knows this. Yet he doesn't want to stop getting to know him. Another week passes, followed by another, and Sirius becomes a frequent visitor in Remus's little home. They still sit together in the coffee shop each day for a drink, sharing handwritten words, jokes, apologies, promises, secrets. He was brave one day, and he asked Sirius if he minded being silent.
Doesn't it bother you?
He wrote,
Staying silent whilst you are with me, don't you mind?
He felt like the entire world was going to collapse around him, whilst he waited for Sirius to respond.
No,
He scribbled down without hesitation, offering Remus a soft smile.
I would never speak again if it meant I got to spend time with you.
He wrote next, his expression nothing but genuine. Remus smiles, some of the guilt washing away. He doesn't know if it will ever fully leave, but it is a start. Walking to the coffee shop on yet another morning, the sun beating down on him, Remus smiles. He feels like he has been doing that a lot recently, smiling. He feels like he is starting to forget the bad days, the days he was lonely, the days he wondered if it would have been better for him to evaporate into thin air rather than spend another day walking this earth. He never thought he would be here, but Sirius seems to bring out the best in him, and he didn't think anybody would ever do that. He stops to see the busker down the road who plays the guitar and lets Remus feel the strum of the music he longs to hear, and he smiles again. He smiles, and he knows he will continue to smile throughout the day, at more customers this time. Not just the man with the guitar, not just Sirius, but anyone who smiles at him, even the people who don't. He walks through the door and is hit with the overwhelming scent of coffee, which now reminds him of Sirius. Dorcas laughs at him when he pulls on his apron and holds out a coffee and croissant, telling him to enjoy it whilst they are quiet. The flow of customers is steady throughout the morning, with the majority of people opting for iced drinks to combat the heat, takeaway cups at the ready so they can be enjoyed in the sunshine. When Sirius walks in, he isn't alone, but he still smiles wide. The person with him is starkly similar, but there are noticeable differences. He still smiles wide as they approach, and Remus flicks on the coffee machine for Dorcas's coffee before turning back to them. The person with Sirius flinches slightly and turns away, before seeming to take a deep breath, place his hands in his pockets, and turn back. Sirius doesn't even have to hold his hand out before Remus slides the notebook across the counter, the routine coming naturally to him.
Good morning, my ray of sunshine, my moonlit sky, my flower in the meadow.
He writes, and Remus feels himself blush.
Good morning, Sirius, the usual.
Remus scribbles back, and Sirius smiles, shaking his head. He turns and says something to the person with him, who he presumes is Regulus. He doesn't know who else could look so similar, yet so different at the same time. He doesn't answer him, keeping his gaze on the wall to their left, so Sirius tries again. When he gets no response, he reaches out, touching his arm gently. Remus feels all of the air rush out of his body when Regulus turns back to face Sirius, raising an eyebrow. Sirius raises his hands.
You took it out.
He signs, and Regulus nods, gesturing to the coffee machine to Remus's left, the one he presumes is loud.
What do you want to order?
Sirius signs next, his hands moving fluidly like he has been signing his whole life. He wonders if perhaps Regulus doesn't speak, and that is why Sirius is so understanding with Remus.
Just a coffee and a sandwich.
Regulus signs, shrugging his shoulder before turning to Remus. He forces himself to look away, pulling out the mugs and setting the coffee machine. He freezes when he realizes Sirius didn't tell him what Regulus wanted, and turns back, looking down at the paper despite already knowing. He wonders to himself if he could tell Sirius he signs, if this could be an easier way for them to communicate, rather than relying on a pen and paper. He waits, though, not wanting to intrude when he is out with his brother. Movement brings his attention back to them, and he watches as Regulus begins signing once again.
So, this is the person you were telling us about, our neighbor.
He asks, raising an eyebrow at Sirius, who nods in response.
I haven't seen him around. I know, because I definitely would have remembered him.
He continues with a wink. Sirius's mouth drops open, and he glares at Regulus.
You are dating my best friend, and even if you weren't, no.
He signs firmly, throwing a glance at Remus and smiling before turning back to Regulus.
Just don't scare him off, please.
He adds,
If I scare him off, you will stop moaning to us about how beautiful he is every night of the week.
Regulus signs with a smirk, leaning his hip against the counter. Remus bites down on his lip as he pulls out the sandwiches, keeping one eye on them despite knowing he shouldn't impose.
Can you blame me?
Sirius replies, his hands moving rapidly before he briefly gestures to where Remus is standing. Regulus rolls his eyes.
Just ask him out already, then you will know if he likes you.
Remus is sure he lets out a little whimper at that, but he can't be sure. Sirius shakes his head and casts his eyes downwards.
He is way out of my league, and I don't want to ruin our friendship.
He signs back, and Remus definitely lets out a muffled snort of laughter at that, as if Sirius can believe Remus would ever be out of his league. The speed at which Sirius's gaze turns to him shows him that this reaction didn't go unnoticed, and he turns away quickly, busying himself with making the coffee. When he turns back, Sirius is no longer stood alongside Regulus, and instead, he is sitting at his usual table, head dropped into his hands. He pushes the drinks across the counter, quickly followed by the sandwiches. Regulus is smirking at him when he meets his eye, and he doesn't hesitate in raising his hands.
Do you sign?
He asks, despite clearly already knowing the answer. Remus nods.
Yes, I didn't know Sirius did and never thought to ask.
He signs as an explanation, throwing a glance back at Sirius to see him unmoved from his previous position.
He has for as long as I can remember.
Regulus smiles before pulling something out of his pocket.
Has the machine stopped?
He signs, and Remus freezes. He turns to the coffee machine, as if it would be clear as to whether it is still making a sound. He has never known how long it runs for after the coffee is served, and aside from Dorcas telling him it is noisy whilst it is working, he knows little else. He discreetly raises his hand and presses it to the side, carefully nodding when he doesn't feel it working. Regulus considers him for a moment before raising his hand, attaching a cochlear implant to his ear, the magnet effortlessly connecting through his hair, bringing the world to life for him. An uneasy feeling settles in his stomach, wondering what it is like for him to experience that. He wishes he could ask how it was for him, ask if he would recommend somebody considering the procedure.
I'm deaf.
Regulus mouths, bringing Remus's attention to his mouth rather than his hands.
This helps, but I take it out when the noises are too much.
Remus nods, flicking his gaze back to meet Regulus's eyes.
Sorry, I didn't know.
He signs, immediately cringing. He knows the last thing he would want is for somebody to apologize, yet this is exactly what he has just done. Regulus shakes his head before looking back at Sirius. Remus follows his line of sight, and when they both see that Sirius is focused on something outside, Regulus meets his eye, raising his hands.
You're deaf as well, aren't you?
He signs, and Remus's breath catches. Nobody has ever asked him that before.
Sirius thinks you are just non-verbal and sensitive to sound, but if that was the case, you wouldn't focus so hard on watching me when I spoke, and I saw you feel the coffee machine.
He takes an unconscious step backwards, feeling his hands shake. He wanted to tell Sirius, he did, but he is scared. He is scared it will shatter what they have if he learns the truth, if he learns that Remus kept this from him for the entirety of their friendship so far. Regulus smiles encouragingly, and Remus nods slowly, willing the tears not to form in his eyes as he looks back at Sirius, whose focus is still out of the window.
You can trust him.
Regulus signs with a soft smile.
Honestly, I don't know how he never noticed, but I suppose he isn't the smartest.
He winks, and Remus laughs, sensing that Regulus doesn't mean these words. He relaxes slightly and steps closer.
I was going to tell him,
His movements drift off as he lets out a sigh.
Didn't know how.
Regulus guesses, and he nods because he didn't know how.
I understand. Take your time.
Remus smiles, and Regulus picks up the tray, walking over to the table. He shakes his head when Sirius says something, but he doesn't respond. It isn't until 2 days later that Remus finds himself alone with Sirius. He had scribbled down an excuse that he couldn't join him for his lunch break the day after he came in with Regulus, and he did the same today. He felt guilty, but he didn't know if Sirius was going to attempt to sign to him, and he didn't know how to respond. Sirius wrote on a napkin before he left, asking if he could join Remus for the walk home. This isn't unusual, with him having done this frequently since the first time, but he still hesitated slightly before nodding, offering him a small smile. Sirius doesn't work far from where Remus works, in the little tattoo shop he owns with James. Some days he has less tattoos than others, meaning he spends more time in the coffee shop or with Remus. Waiting outside the door, it only takes a few moments for Sirius to approach, a shy smile on his face. Their hands brush and their fingers end up loosely connected as they make their way down the road, back to Remus's little home. This is something else that has happened frequently, and Remus still finds he has butterfly wings brushing the edges of his stomach each and every time. When they reach his front door, Remus doesn't even need to raise an eyebrow in question before Sirius is nodding in agreement. They make their way upstairs and he flicks on the kettle, pulling 2 mugs out of the cupboard. He braces himself when Sirius approaches from behind and slowly turns around, leaning against the worktop.
Do you know sign language, or was your reaction just very well timed?
Sirius signs, his hands moving just as fluidly as they did when he spoke to Regulus. Remus laughs and bites down on his bottom lip as he shakes his head.
I sign.
He confirms, offering him an apologetic smile.
I wish I knew. Would have saved a lot of paper.
Sirius laughs, taking a step forwards until their toes are almost touching.
Can I?
He signs, gesturing to the ear defenders he has yet to remove. Remus nods, allowing him to hesitantly raise his hands and remove them, placing them on the side next to them. He smiles before opening his mouth.
You're beautiful.
He mouths, and Remus has never been more thankful to watch his tongue curl around some words. Remus takes a deep breath and raises his hands.
I'm deaf.
He signs, watching as realization takes over Sirius's expression. Sirius opens his mouth before immediately closing it again, looking at Remus closely before smiling and raising his hands.
I said you're beautiful.
He clarifies, and Remus laughs, instantly relaxing.
I know, I can lip read.
He signs with a wink, gently brushing a strand hair behind his ear before adding,
You're not so bad yourself.
Sirius laughs as a soft blush takes over his complexion.
I'm glad you think so.
He smiles, his gaze dropping slightly until it reaches Remus's lips.
I would love to kiss you. Can I kiss you?
He signs slowly, as if he is afraid to move too fast and shatter the moment. Biting down on his bottom lip, Remus nods, unable to think of anything he would rather be doing. Sirius smiles shyly and raises his hand, gently running his thumb across Remus's cheekbone as he slowly moves forward until their noses brush. He feels every nerve ending in his body catch on fire the moment their lips meet, tentatively at first, until Remus moves his hands to Sirius's waist, bringing him closer. He sinks into the feeling of something he has wanted to do for over a month, but fully believed he never would. Sirius moves his hand into Remus's hair after a moment, deepening the kiss. He can feel the vibrations as he lets out a soft noise into his mouth, and it makes everything feel real, alive. He presses forward until their positions are reversed, moving his hands to Sirius's thighs and lifting him onto the worktop effortlessly. Sirius lets out a gasp in surprise before wrapping his legs around Remus's waist, drawing him closer as he smiles into the kiss. The feeling of their lips moving against each other, the feeling of Sirius's fingers gliding through his hair, the feeling of their bodies almost flushed together is something he never thought he would experience. When Sirius's tongue runs across his bottom lip, he responds immediately, deepening the kiss. He doesn't pull back until his lungs are screaming at him to take in a breath, and he presses his forehead to Sirius's, smiling as he looks up at him.
I have wanted to do that for a long time.
Sirius signs when there is some space between them, as little space as they can get away with to allow their hands to move.
So have I.
Remus agrees, before taking a deep breath and offering him an apologetic look.
I'm sorry I didn't tell you I am deaf. I was scared.
He signs carefully, watching his reaction. He doesn't know if he is expecting Sirius to be angry that he kept this from him, or perhaps upset after everything else they shared, but instead, he simply smiles.
You don't owe anyone information about your life before you are ready.
It is signed like a promise, his expression nothing but genuine. Remus nods.
It was Regulus who gave me the confidence to do this, seeing you sign with him.
He smiles, and Sirius looks proud at the mention of his brother's name.
I am not out of your league, by the way.
He adds with a wink. Sirius appears to let out an audible groan as he drops his head into his hands, offering Remus a sheepish smile when he looks back up, a soft blush littering his cheeks.
I didn't know you could understand me, but I don't take it back. You're amazing.
Remus feels himself blush and leans forward slowly, bracing his hands on the worktop either side of Sirius's legs as he closes the space between them once more. He gives Sirius the time to pull away, but it is clear this is the last thing he wants to do as he cups Remus's face without hesitation, bringing their lips together. The kiss is softer this time, with the absence of urgency after weeks of longing but still laced with desire. He moves his hands to Sirius's waist, gently rubbing his thumbs across his hip bones. He feels Sirius let out a soft noise before he breaks the kiss, trailing his lips along Remus's jaw until he reaches the sensitive part of his neck. Remus tilts his head back when he feels his teeth graze over his pulse point, quickly followed by the warm press of his tongue. He has never felt this alive, this willing to surrender himself entirely to another person.
Sirius?
He breathes out, unaware that this was more than a breath of air, until Sirius pulls back, looking at Remus with wide eyes.
You said my name.
He signs and Remus nods.
I didn't think I would ever hear you say my name.
Sirius?
Remus repeats carefully, and tears immediately form in Sirius's eyes.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have.
His hands come to a stop when Sirius shakes his head, carefully covering them with his own, before kissing Remus again softly. When he pulls back, Sirius wipes his eyes before smiling wide.
I assumed you were still nonverbal. I wasn't expecting to ever hear you talk.
He signs, tears falling again. Remus laughs and nods in understanding. He knew that would have been likely, especially after Sirius had spent over a month believing that Remus simply didn't talk.
It is easier for me to wear the pin than explain it to people. I don't talk unless I am alone, or with the cat.
He explains, and Sirius nods, letting out a small laugh.
I'm glad you feel safe enough to talk with me.
Sirius smiles.
Your voice is beautiful, just like you are.
I wish I could hear you say my name.
Remus signs before he can stop himself. Sirius smiles and takes Remus's hands, placing them on the side of his throat.
Remus.
He says, and Remus closes his eyes.
Remus.
He repeats, and he can feel the vibrations of his name through his fingertips.
Remus.
He says again, and he opens his eyes, watching as Sirius bites down on his bottom lip before he raises his hands.
Can you feel your name?
He signs and Remus nods, smiling wide. He reaches forward, gently pulling his lip free from his teeth before replacing them with his own, earning himself a small gasp in surprise from Sirius before they relax into each other's arms. Sirius is coming to rest around Remus's shoulders as they once again fall into a kiss that feels like home. They don't discuss what they are, but they don't need to. Their routine continues as summer drifts by in the background, spending more time together than he ever believed was possible. After the first week, Sirius would stay at Remus's flat sometimes. They would wake up together, sharing sleepy kisses and illegible sign language as their hands insist on never leaving skin for longer than they have to. After the second week, Remus would talk sometimes, the occasional word here and there that never fails to bring tears to Sirius's eyes. They spend their spare time reading together, cooking, going for walks in the park or by the lake. They exist alongside each other, and it feels natural, it feels right. After the third week, Remus officially meets James and Regulus. He always dreamt of having a few close friends that could join him for a few glasses of wine, sharing soft conversations as they snack on crisps and nuts and bread and cheese. He always thought he would like it, and he was wrong because he loves it. There is no soft conversation, but there is plenty of sign language. Regulus takes out his implant, and James and Sirius don't talk all evening, despite being assured they can if they would rather. He watches the way James looks at Regulus, the care and attention he puts into communicating with him, with and without his implant in. He watches how he leaves feather-light touches on him whenever he passes, pressing kisses to his temple and bringing him into his arms for no apparent reason other than to be close to him. Something unfamiliar blooms inside of him when he realizes that each of those things are what Sirius does with him and what he does with Sirius. It is too soon to know what this feeling is, but if he had to guess, he would believe he is falling in love with Sirius. Deep down, he is sure he is. When the fourth week comes around and they slowly slip into autumn, Remus joins Regulus for a coffee in their flat. He didn't tell Sirius he was meeting him, but he doesn't know why, not really. He feels like his life is going better than it ever has, and he is terrified to shatter it, but he longs for the answers to the questions he is terrified to ask. He has never mentioned the hospital letters to Sirius, mainly because he doesn't want to think about them himself.
I was wondering if I could ask you something.
Remus signs from where he is sitting on the sofa, across from Regulus, mugs of tea on the coffee table. Regulus nods, and Remus takes a deep breath.
About your implant.
He specifies, watching as understanding crosses Regulus's expression.
Have you ever considered them? Or hearing aids?
Regulus asks with a small smile. He is comforting, Remus finds, and it makes this conversation easier.
They tried hearing aids when I was younger, but they didn't work.
Remus explains, before pulling a letter out of his pocket and placing it in between them on the sofa.
They have been sending me these for a few years, but I never respond.
Regulus picks up the letter, eyes scanning the words. He takes a deep breath before turning to Remus, offering him a reassuring smile before he tells him about his implants. He explains that he didn't have a choice in the procedure, his parents forcing him to when he was young. He explains that sometimes he remembers the first time he tried them, the tears of relief he felt when he heard sound for the first time, despite it not being his choice. He tells Remus more about how they work, about the advantages, the disadvantages.
If you could go back and have the option, would you still have the procedure?
He signs carefully. Regulus hesitates, looking down at the cochlear implant in his hand as if he is considering it. When he looks up, his expression is soft.
I think I would, because it is still my decision now if I use it. If it gets too much, I take it out and the world falls silent again. If I want to hear, I have that option. But at the same time, it wouldn't be the end of the world if I didn't have it. The most important people in my life are Sirius, James, and now you. And I can communicate with all of you without it.
Remus nods, feeling tears in his eyes. He has never considered it before, despite being desperate to hear music again, to have a conversation, without a care in the world. It was never a risk he was willing to take, raising his hopes if it wouldn't work. But now everything has changed. Sirius has shown him how to live again, how to dance around to music despite it being silent, to smile when he sees the birds rather than feeling the ache inside of him. He has shown him how to embrace this part of him with no shame. But he still longs to hear Sirius's voice, to hear his laugh. He longs to take the lead in dancing as he sings badly to the music.
Have you told anyone else this is an option for you?
Regulus signs next, seemingly hesitant. Remus shakes his head.
I want to think about it before I tell Sirius.
He would never pressure you into anything. Everyone who cares knows this is your decision, and you can take as long as you need to think about it.
Regulus smiles, and Remus knows that. Sirius has never even asked if this could be a possibility. He simply accepts Remus as he is.
Can I ask why you are considering it now, if they have been sending them for years?
Remus smiles and looks down, wondering which reason he should share. Regulus is wearing a knowing smirk when he looks up.
I didn't have a reason to take the risk before, happy to drift by. But now I feel alive again.
He signs sheepishly, knowing this sounds corny.
Plus, I really want to hear Sirius's voice at least once.
Regulus laughs and shakes his head knowingly, and the conversation drifts on. Barely a day passes that Remus doesn't think about the letters over the next few months, and he picks up his phone to send an email 3 times before he changes his mind once again. As Christmas approaches, he and Sirius spend their days in the coffee shop. They walk around the market. They venture out to see Christmas lights. When they are apart, they are often sharing text messages and photos. Some could say they are inseparable, but Remus doesn't mind. One cold December day, Sirius walks into the coffee shop with a wide smile on his face, bundled up in his coat and scarf. He leans over the counter and brings Remus into a kiss, not caring about the customers.
The usual.
Remus signs, turning to pick up a mug. Sirius shakes his head and reaches for the notebook in the pocket of his apron, sly smile on his face. It has been a long time since they shared more than a handful of written words, but he finds himself holding back a wide smile as Sirius brings pen to paper.
I came in to ask you out on a date tonight.
Remus smiles as he looks down at the words. They don't make a habit of going out on dates, especially not in the evening. The dates they have shared so far have been picnics in the park, walks around the lake. They have cooked together in Remus's little flat and curled up under a blanket to watch a film.
I would go anywhere with you.
He writes down truthfully, relishing in the blush that covers his cheeks.
I will pick you up from here after work. Smiley face.
Remus nods and makes Sirius a coffee to take back to work, bringing their lips together once more until Dorcas comes out of the back room and raises an eyebrow at them in amusement. He smiles sheepishly and goes back to work, counting down the hours until he gets to see Sirius again. He pulls his coat tight around himself when he makes his way outside after his shift, finding Sirius already waiting for him on his bike. He was apprehensive the first time Sirius took him out on it, but now he never turns it down. The sky is already dark, cool air rushing around them as he brings his arms around Sirius's waist, holding on tight. He frowns in confusion when they come to a stop outside of the library, which has already closed for the day. Sirius climbs off the bike and takes Remus's hand, tucking their helmets away before leading him up the stairs at the back of the building. Remus follows him, walking up and up until they reach the roof, where he immediately breaks out into a wide smile. There is a picnic blanket spread across the floor, scattered with cushions and even more blankets. There is a picnic basket and a bottle of champagne, string lights, and a small speaker. Remus steps forward, turning around slowly as he looks up at the stars in the sky above them.
You did all of this.
He signs, turning back to Sirius.
Well, I owed you a brownie.
Sirius winks as he steps forward.
James helped. I wanted to make you feel special.
He signs with a smile before his hands fall to Remus's waist and he brings him closer, kissing him softly. They settle down against the wall together, cocooned in blankets and surrounded by a throng of soft lights. Sirius turns on the speaker and places it on Remus's side, allowing him to feel the music whenever he wants to. They pour champagne and share strawberries with chocolate brownies, tasting them on each other's tongue when they lean forward, closing the space like they have 1,000 times before. He settles back into Sirius's arms, feeling him press soft kisses against his neck before he turns his head slightly, meeting his eye.
Can you talk?
He signs hesitantly, never having asked Sirius to do this before. Sirius smiles and nods, tightening his arms around Remus and placing his lips close to his neck. He can feel his warm breath on his skin, accompanied by the soft vibrations of his voice, and he doesn't know what he is saying, but he longs to hear it. He longs to hear his softly spoken words, his nighttime ramblings, his yells in exasperation, his promises that will remain unbroken, his broken moans and gasps of pleasure. The more he considers it, the more he longs to hear it all, to hear Sirius. When Sirius's voice drifts off, he turns slightly and presses a kiss to the corner of his mouth before moving to his knees and crawling into his lap.
I need to talk to you about something.
He signs slowly, bracing himself to tell Sirius about the letters, like he has been meaning to for a long time.
I need to talk to you about something as well.
Sirius replies with a laugh.
You go first.
Remus shakes his head and drops his gaze, nerves suddenly taking over everything.
I need a moment.
He signs, smiling reassuringly when Sirius looks at him, eyes full of concern. Sirius nods slowly and drops his hands to Remus's waist, holding him close for what feels like a lifetime. He wonders if something is wrong, if something has happened that would make Sirius hesitant to talk to him. When he raises his hands, he takes a deep breath.
I wanted to ask what you thought about us moving in together.
His signs come out in a rush, and Remus feels his eyes go wide. He has thought about it, of course he has. He and Sirius have been together for just over 6 months now, which may seem like nothing to some people, but to them it is everything. The majority of the time, he convinces himself that they live together already. Sirius often stays at his flat if he walks him home from work, and Remus has been to Sirius's flat a couple of times, the little 2-bedroom place he has above their tattoo shop. It feels right to make it official.
You want us to live together officially?
Yes, as long as that is what you want.
Sirius asks, a nervous smile on his lips. Remus nods without hesitation, leaning forward to kiss him firmly. Sirius laughs against him and pushes his fingers into his hair, bringing them flushed together.
Do you really want to? You're not just saying yes because I asked.
Remus laughs.
No, I want to live with you, Sirius.
Sirius smiles wide and wraps his arms around Remus, holding him close. He can feel him letting out soft sounds into his shoulder, and when he pulls back, he can see his cheeks wet with tears. Remus smiles fondly and wipes them away with his thumb, leaning forward to kiss him.
What did you want to talk to me about?
Sirius signs when he pulls back. Remus nods and takes a deep breath.
I'm going to go for a consultation.
He signs slowly, and Sirius frowns, tilting his head slightly in confusion.
About cochlear implants. They have been asking me for a while, but I have never been ready. Would you come with me?
I would go anywhere with you, if you're sure you want me to.
I do.
Sirius nods and smiles softly.
I will be with you the whole way.
It might not work. You have to know that before you get your hopes up.
Remus adds quickly, not wanting to raise his own or Sirius's hopes that this will mean he could finally hear Sirius say his name.
I'm not letting myself get my hopes up.
Sirius shakes his head.
I won't, but I want you to know that I will still love you just the same, even if it doesn't work.
He signs with bright eyes. A stuttered breath escapes Remus before he can stop himself. They have never said, signed, or written those words, not until right now. Remus has known for a while that he is in love with Sirius, but he didn't know if it was too soon, if it would scare him away. At his reaction, Sirius seems to have realized what he confessed, but he simply smiles wide.
I love you, Remus.
He signs again.
I have for a long time, and I will forever.
I love you, Sirius.
Remus breathes out slowly, biting down on his bottom lip when more tears roll down Sirius's cheek.
I love you, more than I ever thought was possible.
He finishes, signing his words quickly before he is leaning forward, bringing Sirius into a deep kiss. Remus moved into Sirius's flat the week before Christmas, both of them agreeing that it made sense to be in the bigger space. On Christmas Day, James and Regulus joined them for dinner, presents, food, and drinks. It was the best Christmas Remus can ever remember having. He spent the new year with Sirius by his side, the countdown on the television, the lights dimmed, a blanket over them, kissing through midnight. Remus has his first consultation in January, and Sirius is right by his side. They sit in the office with the doctor and the hospital translator as he talks him through the procedure, the recovery time, the little details that Remus never would have considered. They talk about the success rate, but it is different for everybody, they say. Remus has to be the one to make the decision. Sirius holds him when they get back to their flat, arms wrapped around him on the sofa when James and Regulus walk through the door. He takes some time to discuss everything that happened with Regulus, who understands in a way most people don't. When they climb into bed later that evening, Sirius tells him to take his time. His hands move slowly in the dim room, telling Remus that he is here for him, that he doesn't have to decide right away. He tells him how much he loves him, and they kiss until they are breathless. It is March when Sirius walks into the coffee shop, almost a year to the day they met. He leans across the counter and kisses Remus softly before handing over the post from this morning. He feels his stomach sink when he sees one from the hospital and pulls it open, his eyes scanning the words. It has been a few weeks now since he told the hospital he wanted to go ahead with the procedure, and now he has a date. He has a date, and it is suddenly all real.
Are you all right?
Sirius signs, walking around the counter and pressing a kiss to Remus's cheek. Remus nods and hands over the letter.
It's from the hospital.
He replies quickly before Sirius's gaze shifts to the letter. Sirius looks up with wide eyes when he has read it word for word.
2 weeks, are you ready?
He signs, his expression full of concern. Remus nods, despite feeling overwhelmed. He is ready, but he is scared. He has tried not to raise his hopes, but the possibility of hearing music again, hearing the birds sing, hearing Sirius's voice for the first time, it adds a whole new weight to it.
They will understand if it is too soon, or if you have changed your mind.
Remus smiles and shakes his head.
You will be by my side, so I am ready for anything.
I'm not going anywhere.
Sirius signs a silent promise.
I love you, Remus.
I love you.
Remus breathes out in response. He will never tire of seeing Sirius's reaction to his words, especially the 3 most important ones. The day before, Remus has to go to the hospital. He takes the walk to the coffee shop slowly. He will have some time off whilst he recovers, and he is going to miss his little walk. When he passes the bus stop, he runs his hand along the side, feeling the thrumming engine through his fingertips. He wonders to himself what it sounds like, with it being so long since he heard such a simple, everyday sound. When he reaches the busker down the road who plays the guitar, he once again allows Remus to press his hand flat against the edge, feeling the beat he longs to hear. He told him, with the help of Sirius, he told him he was going to be away from work and wouldn't see him for a few days. The man smiled and told him he would be waiting to play Remus a song if it worked. Sirius signed the words for Remus with tears in his eyes. He knows that is one of the things that will affect him if it works. It has been a couple of years now that Remus has passed him each morning, made him coffee each afternoon. He knows that if he heard the busker down the road with the guitar play for him, he would feel privileged. Walking into the coffee shop makes him smile, finding Dorcas, Marlene, Sirius, James, and Regulus all waiting for him with a banner hanging high above their heads. He lets out a laugh and walks forward, instantly enveloping Sirius in his arms. There is coffee and croissants on the table, good luck cards and flowers. He feels tears in his eyes as each of them hug him, having not expected any of this.
Sirius is terrified, not that he would admit it.
James signs with a smile when they find themselves sat together, the rest of the shop closed for the morning. Remus feels his stomach sink.
Why is he scared?
He thinks you will hate his voice if the implants work for you.
He winks.
You know what his ego is like.
He relaxes instantly, looking over at Sirius, who is laughing with Marlene.
I could never hate anything about him.
He signs with no hesitation. James is watching him with a fond smile when he turns back.
He is lucky to have you.
He signs, his expression nothing but genuine.
We are lucky to have each other.
Remus smiles. Waking up in the hospital, Remus is groggy. He blinks his eyes open slowly, ignoring the ache in his body. Looking up at the moonlit ceiling is peaceful. He is silent like deep water, everything becoming more muffled as he imagines the water filling his ears. He closes his eyes and envisions himself floating away like a stray piece of driftwood in the ocean, the smell of salt filling the air as his body sways fluently through the freezing depths. A small sigh escapes his lips, and this time he knows it is a sigh of relief, not a sigh of dejection. When he opens his eyes again, the morning sun is shining through the window as he shifts his gaze slightly, finding Sirius asleep in the chair next to him, their hands loosely connected on the edge of the bed. A small smile tugs at his lip, knowing he couldn't have taken this step without him. His hand moves of its own accord, just enough to bring Sirius out of his slumber, his eyes going wide when he notices Remus is awake.
I love you, I love you, I love you.
He signs in quick succession, pulling himself up to perch on the edge of the bed. Remus smiles. His voice drifts off as the ache in his head becomes more prominent.
Don't try and talk. They said you may have some pain in your head and ear for a few days. It's normal. You just need to rest.
Sirius signs quickly. Remus nods.
I will. I love you.
He signs instead before bringing Sirius into his arms. He goes willingly, settling his head on Remus's chest and wrapping his arm around his waist. Remus goes home the following day, back to their flat above the tattoo shop to rest. Sirius carries his overnight bag and makes him tea, bundles him up in blankets, and kisses him at every opportunity. Remus finds himself considerably more relaxed now that it is over, knowing that there is no more anticipation about the outcome. It has either worked or it hasn't. He just has to wait to find out for sure. Sirius doesn't let him help in the kitchen tonight, despite them frequently cooking alongside each other. He tells Remus to rest whilst he makes them one of his favorite pasta dishes, and they sit pressed together whilst they eat, the television on in the background. It is hard to sleep when he goes to bed, but Sirius brings him into his arms, and everything feels right. The week passes slowly, which he is thankful for with Sirius by his side. They read books and cook anything they want to eat. They soothe each other's worries and spend far too long in the bedroom. Remus is excited to go back to work, to take his mind off his upcoming appointment, to pass the wait quickly to find out if it worked. On his first day back, he walks with Sirius by his side, hands linked together between them. He runs his hand along the side of the bus as the passers-by climb on and find their seats, feeling the thrum of the engine in his fingertips. When they reach the busker down the road who plays the guitar, Sirius talks to him, whilst Remus closes his eyes, feeling the music flood through his veins. When he reaches the coffee shop, Sirius leaves him with a kiss, he himself going back to work today after taking some time off to be with Remus. The morning passes the same way it always has, and Remus slots back into the same routine easily. He makes coffee, warms toasted sandwiches, he plates up brownies, muffins, and croissants and flapjacks. He takes his lunch break sitting on the back step like he always used to. He tilts his head back and looks up at the birds flittering around the sky, looking down at the people completing mundane tasks. He doesn't wish he were a bird, though, not this time. When Sirius walks in, it is late afternoon, and he smiles, holding his hand out for the notebook. Remus rolls his eyes fondly as he hands it over, feeling a blush work up his cheeks. This is something that effortlessly calms him, Sirius remembering the little things. He knows that even if this works for him, even if he finds himself able to hear, Sirius won't change. He will still sign good morning to him out of habit. He will still sign I love you when they go to bed. He will still request the notebook simply to take them back to when they first met. He will do all of these things because he loves Remus regardless. And for that reason, he finds himself not worrying about what the outcome will be. Sirius hands the notebook back with a smile and a small blush on the top of his sharp cheekbones, and Remus looks down at his words.
I missed you today, sweetheart. I'd become accustomed to being with you every day, stealing kisses, looking at your disheveled hair, bright eyes, and beautiful smile.
You're a flirt.
Remus signs with a smile, pulling him forward by the collar of his jumper to kiss him softly. Sirius nods when he pulls back.
Only for you?
He winks, before signing the same thing he does several times a day.
I love you, Remus.
I love you.
Remus breathes out, watching as Sirius's expression turns to complete and utter awe, like it does each and every time Remus whispers the words he cannot hear, but knows Sirius loves. Sitting in the waiting room at the hospital is a surreal experience when he knows that his future is waiting on the other side of the door, the little thing that the majority of people wouldn't spare a thought of, yet it could be the one thing that transforms Remus's life. It was a long 4-week wait from the procedure to now, but he made it. James and Regulus came to the flat the previous evening, as well as Dorcas and Marlene. They were picking up a few signs, and Remus loved how much closer they had all become since he and Sirius became one. The evening didn't go on as late as it could have, with Sirius insisting he needed to get a decent night's sleep before they came to the hospital, but it was a lovely evening with his friends. When the door opens and the doctor walks out, Remus feels his heart rate increase rapidly. Sirius squeezes his hand in support, and he can feel himself begin to shake before his head mirrors the movement, tears forming in his eyes. He thought he was ready. He was sure he was ready. He has waited for this moment for what feels like forever, waiting to see if he will be granted the privilege of hearing Sirius's voice, his laugh, even something as little as his breathing. But now he is here. He is scared.
I'm scared.
He signs to Sirius, who instantly crouches down onto the floor in front of him, taking his face in his hands. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't sign anything. He simply looks into Remus's eyes, both of them shedding tears.
I wasn't, but now that we are here, I am scared.
Sirius rocks back onto his heels and nods, gently removing his hands.
I know you're scared, but I am right here with you. Always.
He signs slowly before taking Remus's hands and placing them on his throat, covering them over with his own hands as he smiles through his tears.
Remus,
He says, and he can feel the vibrations through his fingers.
I love you.
He finishes, and he will never tire of those words, no matter how they come.
I love you.
Remus says, watching as Sirius's tears fall faster. He takes a deep breath, leaning forward until their foreheads are pressed together, and focusing on the roll of his tongue as he says the words he knows he needs to say.
I'm ready.
Sirius nods and lets out a choked sob as he leans forward to kiss Remus, both of them sinking into it before they carefully pull themselves to standing, turning to face the doctor, who is smiling softly at them. Following her into the room, he doesn't release Sirius's hand until he has to, until they are directed to different chairs in the room with the clinically white walls and too many information leaflets. He takes a deep breath and answers questions as she signs them to him with a gentle smile. He closes his eyes when she tells him she is going to activate and attach his cochlear implant, wishing he was cocooned in the safety of Sirius's arms. He grips the armrests of the chair and tries to ignore the anticipation flooding through him, despite this being an impossible feat. Only when the nurse taps his shoulder does he open his eyes, nodding that he is ready. The first thing he registers is a high-pitched noise that he flinches away from, but it is gone as quick as it came. He looks around the room when the doctor steps back, waiting for something. Anything. He meets Sirius's eye and nods slowly, telling him he is ready.
Remus.
Sirius says, and it is sweet like honey drizzled over fruit in the morning sun. Finite. Thanks for listening to this text-to-speech podfic composed by Burning Aurora, Caliana, and Flowerhawk.